Okay, welcome to the first chapter in the Windows System Administrator Fundamentals book. Now, as I mentioned in the week 1 video, there's a cadence to this. The thinking book, about philosophy and all the rest of that stuff, great information you need. And then this is the technical book. So this is like the think about it book, and this is about the do it book. There's an awful lot of hands-on stuff we're going to be doing. Okay. So let's continue. Chapter 1, page 3. So there's some learning objectives, basically understanding how computer networks work. And you're a senior most likely in a CIS or CS related role, so you probably know all that stuff. Servers, and in particular, Windows Server. Okay, so to introduction, computer networks are composed of host machines and networks and protocols such as TCP/IP, right? You know all this stuff. And network operating system, there's choices. I mean, you could use Windows Server like we're going to do, but there's also, Linux. It makes a great server for a lot of things, and there's a bunch of others. So page 4, they start talking about getting to know the computer networks. And again, these are often, these are terms you've seen before. They're often categorized by the geographic region that they support. Okay, that's how they're categorized by, area or purpose. And so the first one is kind of simple. It talks about what is a computer network. Oh, well, come on. So yes, you have a server of some sort, and then some sort of a network switch that's hardwired to some PCs, and then there's other things because there's a wireless access point. And then maybe you have a printer hung off there. This looks remarkably like my machines at home. I have a kind of a server. I have a network attached storage device. But sure, I got a printer hung off, I got PCs hung off, I got laptops and televisions and thermostats and all the rest of that stuff hung off the wireless. So again, the types of computer network basically talks about the topology, the scope, and the area. That's how they're categorized. And so we're going to start kind of small. And the first one is just the personal area network, PAN. And this basically doesn't require any infrastructure whatsoever. I mean, a laptop and a tablet and, could all talk to each other. I mean, you could have a wireless access point in between. Most likely you would. But no, this works just fine. In other words, I want to do I'm at the office and I want to do file sharing on my phone to somebody else that has a phone. And I just, hook up with Bluetooth and send them what I need. Typically it's done with Bluetooth, maybe Wi-Fi. So a local area network, which is, you're going to have some sort of internet service provider coming at the top of the diagram, and there's going to be switches, and a switch goes over here and a switch goes over there. So that's just a local area network. Now the cable links are kind of low. Typically it's 100 meters for one of these guys. So again, you would have to have lots of switches because if you had a really big building, you couldn't do it all on one switch because the cable links would exceed the threshold. And then the metropolitan, which is basically some sort of a system like if I have headquarters building and I have some of the building over here, I'm not going to be using the same cabling. I'm not using Cat5 cable to go between the two. I'm probably going to be using some fiber and a bunch of other stuff. And quite frankly, most likely the people that are running this metropolitan area network are probably going to be like service providers. In other words, I'm not going to be running the cabling. I'm going to hire somebody else to do that for me, so to speak. And then the last one, of course, is the wide area networks. This is how big cities connect to other big cities. And there's an awful lot of magic behind this because, they're showing satellite dishes, and that is one of the techniques they use. There's lots of others. But these are clearly going to be, internet service by actually companies you may not even remember. You remember Sprint? They used to have home service, all that. Now they don't no longer provide home service, but they still provide this backhaul between cities. Yeah, they're a long distance provider, so to speak. Okay, so page 9, exploring computer network components. So yeah, there's the network devices themselves. You know what we're talking about. The switches and the access points and the routers. You hopefully have heard all those terms before. And then the media that you're sending across. And there's lots of cabling, different types of cabling, right? And then the network operating system. Now, we're only going to concentrate on one of the network operating systems. But okay, so the network devices, clients and servers, that makes sense. So a server is going to be something, I'm going to go back to this other the first one. So the server is one that's going to be like the web server, or the file server, or the media server. It's going to be those things that all these other devices talk to get, they request information from the server. The server's job is to listen for requests and answer. That's it. Okay, no one logs on to the server, does any work on the server. Servers are standalone, designed for somebody to ask them a question. And then hosts and nodes. Any device that can send or receive, and it's typically assigned an IP address. That's kind of a simple definition. So all these devices are assigned an IP address and can get to the server. So as far as the network operating system, again, we're only going to stick with Windows Server. Linux makes a great one. I mean, we have a Linux course, 4335, if you want to learn all about that. So the next one on page 11 talks about the computer network architecture, the physical and logical topology. Now, this used to be a big thing because there were some significant choices in the old days. Instead of just assuming you were going to using TCP/IP, you could be using this thing called token ring. It's an early thing. IBM kind of pushed it a little bit. But at home, you're not going to have any of that. In home, you're just going to have a peer-to-peer network. You're probably not going to have a server at all at home. So there's no central server. And if I wanted to share out a printer that was physically connected to my machine, to my spouse, then all I have to do is just create a share on my computer. It kind of sort of makes it a server, but it's such an incidental role in the operation of the machine. I would never call that a server. And so now your spouse could hit your machine to be able to get to the printer. Cool? All right. So peer-to-peer. And then, of course, there is honest-to-God, client-server thing, where the server has predefined roles. I mean, it's a web server. It's a database server. It's a file server. It's a print server. And that's all it does. It doesn't do anything else. No one logs on. It just sits there and waits for somebody to ask. Okay. IP addressing and subnetting. I'm not going to drive you too crazy on this. But IP version 4, we just called IPv4 and IPv6. There actually was never a 5. It was kind of a research project. So here's the problem. IPv6 is a 32-bit number, and a lot of the numbers are kind of constrained by use of this, what's called classes. And we were running out. I mean, you might think, well, 4 billion IP addresses, that's a huge amount. Well, not if you have 8 billion people on the planet. And in folks in the U.S., they typically have 4 or 5 IP addresses. I mean, right? I mean, it could be a lot. I mean, if you have a phone and a router and a Wi-Fi tablet, you're going to have IP addresses all over the place. So IPv4 was the old one, the current one. Well, kind of current. That predefined network classes, you probably remember this, a class A, B, and C. And there's an E, but don't worry about it. Class A's are for the big boys, like the Army. The Army gets a class A, and it can have lots and lots of addresses. But nowadays, that's just, all of them are gone. All the class A's are gone. B's too. Maybe a tiny bit of class C's you can find out there. But the class C's are what everyone uses at home. And you're thinking, wait a minute, I just told you we ran out. Well, okay. So IPv6 solved the problem. It went to a 128-bit number. Now, you might think, well, 128-bit, that's 4 times bigger than the 32-bit number. No, it is an inconceivably large number. Okay, it is more than the grains of sand on all the beaches in all the world kind of a number. So there's no way we're going to run out of IPv6 numbers. Not happening. Okay. So let's look at the traditional subnetting that you use for the old school. So, wait a minute. Okay. So the idea is that you would have IP address. So 192.168.1 or 192.168. That should be a common number. If you've been working with computers a while, you're going to remember. You go, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. 192.168. Well, that is a set aside for a Class B address that is not routable. In other words, it only works inside your home. So all these switches And all these file servers and all these PCs all run an IPv4 dedicated Class B that is not exposed to the outside world. That is how you don't run out of IP addresses, because no one sees these IP addresses. So my 192.168.1.4, you can have a 192.168.4 at your house, and there's no problem, because that number never leaves my house. When it gets to my house, the router, it uses network address translation, and it takes my number and converts it to something that the internet service provider has, and then it goes on its merry way. Okay, cool. All right, so continuing, page 15. So traditional services like web and file and print, that kind of stuff, and you need some sort of a platform for Microsoft, exchanging information like SQL Server or SharePoint. And a lot of people have begun to transition these things to the cloud, because servers are kind of sort of tough, and setting up a server, there's a lot of responsibilities. And so rather than doing it on-prem, you might want to consider, well, I need a SQL Server. I might consider going to the cloud rather than trying to do that myself. Your choice. We obviously are not going to be using any cloud, because I want you to be able to see this stuff hands-on. Okay, server hardware and software, it's normal stuff. You got to pay attention to a CPU, probably with lots of cores. Memory, a lot of memory, depending on what we're doing. I mean, if you're doing a SQL Server, you're going to need a lot of memory. Disk and networks. And then they talk about sizes and form factors and stuff, page 22. Rack mounted, because most of the time this is not going to be stuff sitting on a desk somewhere, right? Servers, typically in a corporate environment. So a 19-inch rack, and the height of a 19-inch rack is in U units. Hey, I don't know where they came up with that. So you get a 2U rack, and it's going to be 19 inches wide and 2U units up. And so it'll slide into your rack, and you can count how many U's you have in your rack and figure out how many devices you can put in there. Okay, blade servers, those were kind of cool. Not so much now, but what they used to have is just like a cage in a 19-inch rack. It had a bunch of slots in it. And so you grab a CPU card and you pop it into that little slot. And if you needed more, you didn't have to buy another thing. You just put another card in there, Those are, I don't see those much these days, but it's pretty cool. So there are, plug and play, self-contained, a special tray that you plug these guys into. And then the tower, that's just a big PC, right? You just go to the store and buy an El Cheapo, tower case and do it yourself. Sit it on the floor someplace. That works. Okay, so continuing, page 17. They talk about the network operating system. So basically Windows, Linux, and Mac OS is the only real viable choices. I mean, you kind of could consider, Novell Server as a different breed, but not really. I mean, there was an awful lot of them that were add-ons. I remember Banyan Vines. It was built on Linux and then on top of. So that's kind of sort of the way Novell does some of their stuff. So Windows Server Overview, page 18. When you put together a Windows Server, and we're going to do this here pretty soon, is you have a choice between whether or not you want to go to the traditional desktop version, where you get to see everything. You log in like you always would. You got the cool little windows and all the rest of the stuff. Or go to the command line version. Yeah. Now the command line version is first of all, it's surprising. Okay. I did it. I said, hey, I want to try this. And I very quickly found out there was a lot of things I didn't know how to do that I've been doing every day for years, and I didn't have to do it from the command line. For example, okay, great. How do you add a machine to the domain from the command line? I don't know. I had to go look it up. How do you change the time zone? I don't know. I had to go look it up. It was all fundamental things that you had to do every time you set up a server, and I had never done them from the command line. But it reduces the attack surface. So when people come in, they can't attach Notepad, because guess what? You don't have Notepad in a CLI environment. So good stuff to do, but we're not doing it for this class because that would be really throwing you to the wolves. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark, as you probably have remembered. We'll break this thing up into 15-minute chunks, and we'll continue in just a few.